Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Richards. I'm the Western Business Development Manager for our residential products. Welcome to the class here today. Today, we're going to cover our QO and Homeline plug-on neutral product. I think you'll find that this is a very innovative type product. Once again, it's a product that none of our competitors have at this time. I think you'll find that this is a much easier installation of product. It speeds up your time on the job, and best of all, it opens up some gutter space so you can fit all those wires that you have to fit in there in today's world. So let's move on. Let's open it up. The one thing I'm going to kind of start with a little funny here, but oftentimes we talk especially about our CAFE and arc fault breakers, let's say, all have pigtails. All of our smart breakers have pigtails. Well, it's kind of funny. Cows use pigtails or use their tails basically to swat flies and other things. And here's a funny one for you: is what good is a pig's tail on a pig? It really doesn't swat flies. It's not much. So the question becomes, why do we need pigtails in our panels? Well, here's a good picture. If you look on the far right-hand side here, this is a typical installation currently if you don't have plug-on neutral. So let's look at this a little bit closer. The picture on your left, on the left side here, is a good indicator, or is a good picture of what a plug-on neutral panel looks like. So what does this mean to you? Well, first of all, as we mentioned, plug-on neutral is much faster to install, especially when you're looking at your, arc fault breakers, right? It eliminates basically one cable of termination. There is less training involved because really that breaker just stabs right on. And really the final point here is that look at the difference in your raceway. The picture's on the right. I've got all these little pigtails tucked in behind my hot and neutral cable here going to the breaker. On the left-hand side, look at how clean this is. I've got my hot and my neutral coming in. The breaker stabs right on to the bus. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail further on in the class, but just look at the difference. Just appearance alone makes a big difference. So as I mentioned, really, there's no gutter space. It frees up your gutter space. So it meets all your NEC requirements for the breakers and space. Final inspection is much faster because you can actually see all the wires. The inspector doesn't have to go through there and mark, hey, is the neutral really tied down for this particular breaker? So it really is a much cleaner, much faster. Everyone likes plug-on neutral. And then the final point here is it really alleviates a lot of the mistakes and callbacks that you have, particularly with arc fault breakers. Oftentimes, because that is a braided cable that we use for that pigtail, when you stab that into the neutral bus, sometimes there could be a loose braid there, which then gets tucked under that neutral bus. Nobody can see it, but then the homeowner moves in. We've got some arcing going on, and so that breaker's tripping all the time. Everybody gets frustrated with that. However, with a new plug-on neutral design, all of that goes away because we don't have to worry about that pigtail and it being properly installed. So what does a plug-on neutral breaker look like? So the key here is, and you'll hear me say this throughout the presentation today, it's a much faster installation, no doubt, because I alleviate that second termination of that neutral cable that normally you have in a panel, right? Because you've got that neutral that goes into the breaker, then you've got to have that neutral that's coming off, that's the pigtail, and terminated. So in a typical installation, you're terminating 3 wires per branch. When you have an arc fault circuit, in a quick grip panel, you're only terminating 2 wires. So as I mentioned, no pigtails. Easier diagnostics because our breakers actually with quick grip have time saver diagnostics, and we'll cover that in a different training. But keep in mind that that test button works as a diagnostic button as well, not only for installation to prove that the installation is correct, but it does have a diagnostic feature. We do offer CAFE breakers in single pole 15 amp and 20 amp configurations. The part number is very easy. So it's the part number you're used to with a home HOM. The one goes in there for single phase, and then you put your amperage or your pole, which would be either 15 or 20. Normally you would see a part number minus that letter P. So you would see an HOM 120 CAFI, but to do a plug-on neutral breaker, you move to HOM 120P for plug-on neutral and CAFI for your arc fault breaker. So most of you are very familiar with our new dual function breaker, but from a part number standpoint, it too is very easy. So all we're going to do is add the letter P at the end of the part number before the DF that represents that it's plug-on neutral. Now, the question in your mind, do we still offer the standard breaker with a pigtail? Yes. We will continue to offer that standard breaker because there's an awful lot of older style panels out in the field, and we need to be able to offer product for those when you do your upgrades in your bedrooms and living spaces. So we will still continue to offer a standard pigtail style breaker. What's the part number for a standard pigtail? All you need to do is remove the letter P, and there's your pigtail style breaker. So let's look at some of our competitor product. So in the case of Cutler Hammer, they are the only competitor out there right now that has a plug-on neutral design. Now keep in mind, this is only in their CH, or basically their top of the line product. They do not offer plug-on neutral in their BR series. So we too, as you saw, we offer a plug-on neutral in QO, which we've had for some time. Really, the new launch over the past couple of years has been the plug-on neutral for Homeline product. But let's look at their sticker that they include with their plug-on neutral design. I think it's kind of interesting. You'll find that they call out very specifically that neutral screw needs to be removed, or it cannot be backed out. Needs to be tightened down before you install the breaker. So the picture here on the left is a Cutler Hammer CH panel, and you'll see that their neutral foot actually goes over the top of the breaker, or over the top of the bus screw. In what we've done is we've looked at it a little bit differently. We feel that this could actually potentially, if that screw doesn't get tightened down correctly, could cause an arc. So what did we do differently? Well, here's a good close-up view of the new plug-on neutral bus. So the first thing I want to point out is that we have a fully distributed neutral bar. Goes all the way up and down that bus. So it's not stopping at 3/4 of the way down, but it goes all the way down to the bottom. The next thing that what we've done is we've actually created an area for the breaker, for an arc fault breaker to be terminated. Now in this picture here on the left, you'll see that this is just a standard thermal mag breaker. The piece that really is awesome about this, and then you'll see a typical arc fault breaker here as well, but here's what's awesome about this is that when you terminate just a standard 2-pole breaker or a thermal mag breaker, where are you going to terminate the neutral for that branch circuit? Well, with plug-on neutral, here's my neutral bus right here and my neutral screw. I'm going to keep the neutral and the hot together on this breaker. Well, what does that mean to you? Well, number one, for installation, it's going to be quicker because I don't have to drive my neutral up to the top of the panel like in other brands. Number two, if I have to come back and do any kind of troubleshooting, I don't have to go fishing for that neutral wire because it's right next to the breaker, whether it's a 2-pole or a single pole like you see here, or even in the case of an arc fault breaker, the neutral is right there with the hot. So that's a big plus, big time savers, right? Also, what this does, it means you can save a little bit of wire because the wires are all coming together. And as I mentioned, the neutrals and hots are terminated together on the breaker. So big point here is that, once again, it's much easier, much quicker to install, and you can get in, get out, and get to the next job very quickly. The picture here in the center, just want to point out, we've got the holes here for your neutral, and the bus screws themselves are actually backed out. So you as a contractor, you don't have to back those screws out. They're already backed out. You slide your neutral underneath, you tighten it down, and once again, you're off to the next project. So let's look at the bus a little bit closer. So we've talked about the neutral bus. Let's talk about the phase section of the panel. So if you look really closely here, we've actually put notches now in all of those connections right there. And what is that for? Well, it's actually so you can put tandems and quads anywhere in that panel. So no longer is it just down here at the very bottom, which you all know when you have to go in, you do an upgrade to a panel. It was really painful if I had to grab and find space for a 20 amp circuit, which are usually further up in the panel. I have to lengthen cable. I had to do a number of different, or we had to do a number of different things to get down to the bottom bus where we could actually put a tandem breaker. But now with this new busing, look at this. We can put tandems and quads anywhere in that panel. So when you go back and you have to do some upgrading to the panel, once again, this just makes it much easier to do those upgrades. So especially in today's world where we're adding solar often, we're out of space. A 30 circuit or 20 circuit panel just isn't enough anymore. So the great thing about this is that I can tandem up a couple of things and I can make the room for those 2 breakers needed for PV. So as I mentioned, we offer plug-on neutral in both styles, whether it's Homeline or QO. So here's a great comparison as you move on down the comparison here, QO being on the right-hand side, Homeline being on the left. So there's a lot of similarities, a lot of features and benefits that are exactly the same. The one thing that you're going to notice as a difference between QO and Homeline is really the neutral bus. So in Homeline, the neutral bus is fully distributed down both left and right side of the panel. In a QO panel, we still have a fully distributed neutral for the plug-on breaker that you see here that I'm pointing out, but you still have to drive your other neutral wires up to the top of the panel. But keep in mind, we've got copper bus here, we've got aluminum bus over here. All in all, guys, it's a great choice. Either way you go, plug-on neutral does save you time, does save you troubleshooting time. It's a much better way to go. Now, one of the upgrades, I want to point out some of the upgrades that we've done to the enclosures when we moved to the new plug-on neutral design is we actually changed the KOs up a little bit. So you'll see here on the left-hand side of your picture here, what we did is we actually added these KOs in the back of the panel. So now when you're doing back-to-back installations, this makes it much easier because now I got a good-sized KO here that we can bring the wires through the back. We don't have to bring them through the top. The other change that we made was we actually enlarged the holes on the side here. So now you've got a little bit of adjustment with the panel. When the sheetrocker comes in and does something crazy, you can actually loosen that screw and make a final adjustment on that slotted hole there. So it, once again, makes it much easier to get this panel in and make it look nice when you walk away from the job. So the other thing that I wanted to point out is that because we moved up to plug-on neutral, this actually allows us now to offer 54 and 60 circuit panels. I mean, that is a big panel, but when you've got that large job, there's a huge advantage to having just one panel rather than having to spend the money for a sub panel and then have to find the space for the sub panel. So keep that in mind when you're looking at plug-on neutral. We do have the larger panels now, so we're not just focused on that 40 circuit, because remember that 40 circuit rule went away a few years ago. So it allows us to move to these larger panels, which is awesome when you have a larger home that you're working with and you need to get everything in one panel rather than two. I want to point out is that all of our bus bars have been changed a bit. So what we did is we tried to, once again, it's all about getting those wires in there and getting it in nice and neat. So our neutral bus bar, or our ground bars, actually now allow for up to 3 number 10 wires in each one of those holes. So that's why you find that when you do a panel, you open up the box, you're going to see the ground bar is a little bit shorter. And it's because now we are UL approved to put 3 number 10s, up to number 10 gauge wire in each one of those holes. So it just gives us a little bit more flexibility. It gives you, a little bit more room inside there, and really it saves wire and saves space inside that gutter where we don't have a lot of space to start with. Let's focus a little bit more about the savings side of plug-on neutral. Now this takes into account the new arc fault breakers. So many of you are on the 2014 code, or many are on the 2010 code. Either way, you're going to have quite a few of the arc fault breakers installed in your project. When you start installing arc fault breakers, obviously they're larger bodied. We take up a little bit of gutter space with those, and as we mentioned early on in the presentation, a pigtail actually just is one more connection and one more cable that I need to find space in that gutter for. Well, so what we've done here is taken a good example of a typical installation. So if you look at the numbers here on a typical multifamily project, we just pick 300 units. Right? And we figure that with plug-on neutral, you will save 1 minute of time because you don't have to terminate that pigtail. So if you had 8 arc fault breakers in a panel, and you're basically saving 24 minutes of time, that equates to 40 hours of labor time that you're saving. That's pretty impressive. So let's do the same thing on a single family. So if you jump over here, let's say you've got 150 homes on a project, same kind of configuration here. You're going to save 2,400 minutes saved. We figure that you've got, in a single family home, you've got about 16 arc fault locations. Now that's a little heavy, but that's taking into account the 2014 code, where we have more spaces, including the kitchen and laundry room where we have to put that. We do the same division here, so we divide that by 60. So basically you're saving yourself 40 hours of labor time just to use plug-on neutral. Now in my mind, 40 hours, that's an entire week's worth of pay for a single man hour. That's a lot of savings. So once again, I think this proves out that plug-on neutral not only is easier to install, frees up some space, but most importantly, it puts money back in the contractor or your pocket. So how does the part number look? So let's walk through this very quickly. The part number hasn't changed a lot, but I think you're going to notice one big change. So if we walk through this, now we're going to pick out just the Homeline product, but the same thing would be true for a QO. So instead of having Homeline here, you would see a QO in this place here, and that indicates the style of panel. The next number actually represents the number of spaces. So here's what changes. It used to be that the second number was a little bit smaller than the first, or equal to the first number. Now that second number actually doubles. So the question in your mind is, why did it double? Well, this is because we can put twins and quads throughout basically twins throughout the entire panel. So now the part number is a 40 circuit, but if I twin it up, it's an 80 circuit. So that's why the 4080. The next part number is easy to it's either going to be main breaker or lug only. The next part number represents the main rating. So this is very standard, what you're already used to. Here's what changes right here. So you're going to see the letter P in here, which means plug on neutral. Now in another training we covered quick grip, but if this had a letter Q in its place or right next to the letter P, that would represent quick grip. But for today's exercise, we're going to just drop in a letter P, which represents the plug on neutral panel that we've discussed. The next part number is going to give you basically the ground, meaning that the ground would be with this particular panel because it's a main lug panel. If it was a main breaker panel, the G would be gone because we do not include ground bars with main breaker product. The last number or the last letter here represents the cover. So in this case here with home line, there is a cover included, so there will be a letter C. The last indication here is VP. Sometimes you'll see this, oftentimes you see it in other areas, but that means that there's a value pack, or there are usually some breakers that are also part of this package. So just keep that in mind. All right. So once again, the part number for the plug-on neutral is very easy, pretty straightforward. Should be able to call out whatever size panel you need. Now, one other piece that is now a requirement in all of our panels is this little safety insulator. So we're going to cover this very quickly, but definitely wanted to make you aware that all of our panels have this now installed. So, and I say all of our panels, this would be main breaker panels only. So what is it? It actually complies now with the new 2017 NEC code requirement that requires us to have some sort of device covering the main entrance, the main lug area there on the breaker. So you can see we've got some for load centers, we've got some for our panel boards. This piece here is for the QO series. This is for Homeline. And this really pretty much goes down. We even have a cover now for the CSED, but you'll see the requirements now that are in the new code, and that's why we have these products. So let's look at them a little bit closer. This is a good one because once again, we point out exactly what these are for. So it's important to remember that this is really a safety enhancement. It's nice because, you know, when you get in there and you start pulling some of your cables, let's say you're doing an upgrade to a panel, what oftentimes that little ground wire that's hanging there, you're doing your job getting the neutral and the hot terminated, but that ground wire gets kind of loose in a panel. And oftentimes there's a chance that would come right across that incoming service and that lug, and there's a chance for an arc. So once again, this is really keyed to be a much safer way of doing some work when you've got to come back in and add a breaker. Now I know many of you have actually, you know, you have your way of covering that bus, but this will make it much easier, much cleaner, and look more as if it should be there rather than trying to do something on the fly to make sure you and your team members are safe. What's the value prop here is, once again, there's really not much of a cost adder for this. It really just kind of keeps things safe for you and your team. So here's a better look at what we are currently doing, or what we were doing prior to the requirement, the new UL requirement. So that lug area right here, sorry, I've done that twice on you here today. But that lug area right here was left open, and usually there's about 1/4 inch of exposed wire, which is required. so that there's exposed area there. That was open to, as I discussed just a moment ago, that ground wire or another wire coming across there and causing an arc. As you can see here is a good example of multiple products with those insulators in place. So here's a good look at a QO panel, how that slides over the top, covers up that lug. Here's a little bit closer look at that same thing you'll see on our panel boards. This is a main breaker. You can see where that loads or is actually attached as well. So I want to look at the connector just a little bit closer. And there's a couple of unique features about this that we're pretty proud of that our other competitors do not do. One thing you're going to notice right away is that there is a hole right here. This is actually obviously for the incoming service, but we do offer this in a couple of different sizes. So there is a smaller size for your smaller amperage product. 150, 200 amp product will have a much larger hole here. The same thing on this style of bracket. That hole will actually increase in size as you increase the size of the service. There's another piece on here that a lot of people ask me questions about, and it's this little hole right here. What's that hole for? Well, that small hole is there so you can get your voltmeter in there and actually do some testing without having to remove that entire bracket. So we feel that's a big plus. The type of material that we build this out of is very pliable, very flexible. So the nice thing about this is that you can come in, you do your termination, and then you slide this piece on. You don't have to slide it up the cable. We're going to talk about that here in a minute as well. But here's another look at what it would look like on a panel board. So once again, you can still see that little hole there for your voltmeters. You can see the different size of holes here based on your incoming service. You can see how it mounts very quickly onto a breaker. Same kind of thing, but really it's all about safety, guys. This is really get in a habit of using these. Number one, it's a requirement, but number two, it really does make your job safer and safer for your team members. So one thing I want to caution you on is that, as I mentioned early on, this does come, these connectors or covers come with every panel, but they are not installed. They're, as we're showing here, they're actually in a small baggie that's just kind of thrown into the panel. I shouldn't say thrown, it's actually placed into the panel, right? But it's in the panel, it's loose in the panel. So if your guys are sliding the panel out and they're used to just kind of dumping all the stuff out, make sure that they don't throw this away, because as I mentioned in 2018 here, it is a requirement and you've got inspectors looking for these devices. So keep in mind that it is loose in the package and that your guys need to keep it. Don't throw it in that dumpster. All right, so here is the really the NEC code that calls this device out. So we won't spend a lot of time on this. The one point that you may want to take from this is it's really marked as the 408.3 and 408.36. These are the code requirements for these bus connectors or bus covers. Now, as I mentioned, this is a good picture of one of our competitors and how they do their bus cover. Remember, this is a requirement. But the thing I want to point out here is that we're unique in that we don't require you or the installer to actually put this cover on prior to you bringing the service line in and terminating it onto the lug. In the case of Eaton, they have to slide, an Eaton installer would have to slide this up the service cable, do their installation, and then slide it back down. If I have to do any kind of work or any kind of metering, you're going to have to slide that thing up. It's just harder to work with, we feel. So just wanted to make you aware of that. I think we've done a great job because, once again, if for some reason the bus cover did get thrown away, we do offer this as a separate piece, and it does allow you to go back in and you don't have to re-terminate anything. All you have to do is slide it over the top. So guys, once again, in summary, I think we've got a great product here. We talked about, the plug-on neutral and the benefits and how that could actually save you money, save you time. And we talked about the new bus cover that will actually keep your team safe, keep you safe. I think we've got a great lineup once again. Guys, we certainly appreciate your time, taking the time to view this. Have a great day and happy selling. Thank you.